Welcome to Bottom Up, a monthly podcast dedicated to issues and topics of interest to young lawyers in Wisconsin and beyond. I'm Emilio Villagele.
And I'm Kristen Hardy, and we're your hosts. This is the Bottom Up Podcast. Hello. Welcome to the Bottom Up Podcast, the Wisconsin State Bar podcast dedicated to empowering young lawyers with insights and wisdom from seasoned legal experts. I am one of your hosts, Kristen Hardy, and I'm joined here today with our communications director, Joe Ford. Hi, Joe.
How you doing, Kristen?
I'm well. How
Good
are
to see you.
Likewise. It's been a while.
I know.
You're doing all your fancy podcasts, the other ones, So,
That's right.
But I'm so happy to have you join us here today with our guest, Max T. Stevenson, a respected partner in the family law department at Gimbel Reilly Guerin and Brown LLP. Hi, Max.
Hi, thank you for having me today.
Of course. It's nice to have a fellow Marquette grad here. If I understand correctly, you're a double Marquette guy, right?
Correct, undergrad and law school.
Awesome. So again, thanks for joining us. So can you share a little bit about your background personally and professionally? Because you just told me that your dad was a business owner here, so that's interesting.
Yeah, I can start. I grew up in the community. My dad was a car dealer, and I guess I'll lead with my most important stuff. I'm married. I have 3 young children, 7, almost 6, and 3, so I'm busy.
You're in it, man.
I'm in it, and honestly, it does give me a new perspective now having kids dealing with the type of stuff I deal with, so...
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I'm a partner at Gimbel Reilly Guerin and Brown. I head up our family law department, and I handle all aspects. So family law, I think, is defined differently by different people. Primarily, it's divorce. There's no question about that. But I also, yesterday, handled an adoption by a step-parent, which is one of the few nice things I get to do. And I also handle, unfortunately, restraining orders.
How did you come to specialize in family law?
So I didn't really go into being a lawyer thinking I'd be a family lawyer. I had no real interest in it in law school. I took 0 family law classes, talked to a lot of times when we interview prospective new lawyers at our office for family law, some people, I took a family law class or I didn't take a family law class. And I know that's a question that gets asked a lot in interviews. And I don't think that's necessary. I walked in thinking I was going to be in a courtroom for criminal defense. When I was in law school, I took a lot of bankruptcy courses. They had a need at Gimbel Reilly for family law and help in divorce work. And so I kind of just got shuffled in, and it was a good fit, and I've been there ever since.
Nice. So how did you did you go through OCI? Like, how'd you get the interview and the clerkship?
So actually, I grew up down the street from Jason Luzak, who is a partner at Gimbel Reilly and heads up our criminal defense and white-collar defense team. And he had met with me at some party or something, at some event, while I was in law school, and I expressed an interest in working with him. I was working for a bankruptcy lawyer at the time and really wanted to try out criminal defense. So he brought me in as a law clerk. I interviewed with some partners, and I got hired, and I've been there since 2012 now. Grew up in Brookfield. I live in Brookfield. I never intended to move back to Brookfield, but I'm a very tight-knit family person. My parents are 5 minutes away. My older sisters and their families are 5 minutes away. My brother's probably 10 minutes away. So...
I grew up in Brookfield.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I went to Brookfield Central. Now, where did you go?
I went to Brookfield East.
Okay, we might have to stop this right now.
It's a rivalry.
As my brother would say, we've got a real problem with Brookfield Central.
Yeah, that's funny. I'm familiar with Brookfield. It was a good place to grow up.
Yeah.
That's great. So I wanted to ask you, there's so many questions in family law. I feel like it's such a highly emotionally charged practice area. So can you kind of explain how you deal with kind of that stressful side of practicing in the family law area?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, family law, I think the term I use is it's very volatile. I think litigants themselves are entrenched in what is likely the most stressful thing they'll go through in their lives. And that's not me saying that as a lawyer. I had a very impactful CLE I took probably a year out of law school that was put on by a number of therapists and psychologists, and they really focused on what happens in the human brain when you go through a divorce. And there's been countless studies trying to address how different life changes can impact an individual and set them into the fight or flight type mode. And divorce was always coming up as the second most stressful thing behind the death of a spouse, ironically. So that's more stressful than losing your job, losing your home, losing a family member, having financial issues. And so approaching cases that way and knowing that people are not their normal selves that you might see at a party or out on the streets, you're seeing a very vulnerable person, and you're seeing their very true self sometimes and their worst selves. And my approach is, my job is to not become part of the problem and to kind of pull them out of that and help them move forward with their lives, that they're going to have a new life post divorce, post any family law issue that they're going through, set them up for success. And then the hard part for me then is to separate that from my own life, right? Because you're dealing with kind of counseling people through these hard times, and then just being able to put up that you're not getting kind of pulled into the abyss with them.
And so when you were starting out as a young lawyer, how did you learn how to do that? Did it take a while for you to get to a place where you're like, okay, this is how I'm going to practice law, and this is how I'm going to deal with the clients? Like, how was that process for you?
Oh, for sure. My wife would tell you when I started, it was like 20, and not that it's not 24/7 now to some degree, but it was 24/7 on the phone, stressing about every single email that comes through or text message, whatever that may be, just constantly getting pulled into it. And what I saw was the lawyers who get pulled into what I call the abyss of the stress were not as impactful on the case as the ones who could separate themselves. So I made a concerted effort to focus on how do I solve the problem and hyper-fixate on the problem. And so the idea is, when you've got a number of clients who all have problems that are urgent to them, right? It's that the child wasn't turned over on time, or the other parent gave them McDonald's too many times, or those little problems, and they're all flying at you like everyone's throwing baseballs at you. Is to just focus on one thing at a time and slowly start accomplishing things and kind of snowball that. And that really helped me. If you could just focus on solving the problems for people rather than getting kind of pulled down by their stress itself, it's allowed me to kind of focus on those and separate it from my own life.
Are there any particular cases or experiences that kind of stand out that maybe helped you understand your practice better or shape the way that you practice?
Yeah, actually, I thought about that before the podcast quite a bit. There's one case in particular that I've grown with throughout my career, and it's helped me grow as a lawyer. It's been going on for probably 8 years now, so it's kind of grown with me throughout my practice. And it's a high conflict post-judgment divorce. It was a high conflict divorce. There's a lot of resources available to the litigants. And what I saw was, on the other side, we had lawyers that were taking the approach of, we just file everything, we do everything we want our clients to do. We don't take the approach of what's best for this family that is now separating into two different households. And I think seeing how that case has progressed over the years, and I mean, we've had weeks of trial, and I'm not exaggerating, we've had periods of time where we've had 2-week trials on one issue. And so that's helped me grow, knowing what's effective, and having that case at such an early stage in my career, being able to see how it's progressed, and to see, working with one of my mentors, learning what's effective in the courtroom on that case, what's effective in client management, in negotiating things, working with high-end mediators. That's allowed me to grow a lot. So I've been fortunate that way, but that particular case will stay with me for the rest of my career. Hopefully not just because of the ongoing litigation, but because of the impact it's had on me.
It sounds like divorces are kind of maybe your bread and butter. That's primarily
that's primarily what I focus on. And divorce, the one thing is, people, when they get divorced, this is what I tell them: your marriage is over, but your life's not over. You still have a post-divorce life to live. That also comes with the fact that you're sticking around with them oftentimes after the divorce. There's things to clean up. There's things with finances that still have to be resolved. And then when you have kids, if kids are young, when parents are divorced, you're helping them through that process as the kids go through different phases in their own lives. Because you could get divorced and you have an 8-year-old, and then they become a 13-year-old. And that's a totally different dynamic of parenting in two households, even in one household. And so it's helping them through those processes as those things change.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Like the Wisconsin lawyers they work with, Wilmick does business with care and responds thoughtfully in real time to being a reliable malpractice insurance company and risk management resource for lawyers. Wilmick stands by their policyholders with advice, relevant risk resources, and claims management.
Hi, Russell Nicolay here with Nicolay Law, Accident and Injury Lawyers. If you have clients that have been injured, my office would love the opportunity to help them get compensated and get their life back on track. We handle referrals and co-counsel relationships on injury cases all across Wisconsin.
Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
Do you deal with issues sometimes that are not legal issues? Like, how do you communicate with a client when they're coming to you and it may not necessarily be a legal issue that they're asking you about?
Yeah, I get that a lot. And I think there's a line sometimes that's blurred where someone may need to see a therapist, and that's okay. And they want to talk to the lawyer about it. And so I do the best I can to just listen. I think a huge part of family law is giving someone that podium to stand at and express what they're feeling, because sometimes emotions expressed are better than emotions bottled up that blow later.
Yeah. We were talking a little bit before the podcast about family law as a practice area that we see some lawyers who work in that area, they're under threat sometimes by not maybe clients on the other side or other family members. Like, can you talk about things that have happened and that you've seen out there while you're practicing in this area?
Yes. So I've got two stories that come to mind. The first one actually happened recently where a litigant showed up. He was a pro se litigant. He showed up with a friend at our office looking for me. And who knows what it was. It turned out to be harmless. He just wanted to drop off papers, but he didn't want to just drop them off. He wanted to meet with me. And so we just had to have security escort him out. I did have a case, I should say, because I do handle restraining orders that spill over from family law issues, whether it be domestic violence and disputes of that nature, where the respondent in the injunction lived in Florida, and he had a house full of weapons, like semi-automatic rifles, flamethrowers, shotguns, and he would post on social media. If we sent him a letter trying to resolve something, he'd post the letter, and then he'd post it up on like a Target, and then he'd just light it up with his guns. Oh. And then all of a sudden everyone on social media, the internet soldiers, are coming in saying that they're going to get me and all this other stuff. So, and then of course I'm sitting there trying to get him to show up to court and turn in his weapons. So that was kind of stressful going to those hearings. And so there's really not a great way to deal with it other than to just, again, I talk about hyperfixating on things you can control, and the things you can control are, you're a lawyer, you have a job to do. It's to, there's a concern here with the way this person's behaving, and you're seeking out that restraining order. Focus on that, not focus on what could happen, because then that'll impact your ability to litigate it.
Yeah, and I'm interested, does your firm have the protocols in place to deal with people who might come in looking for you, or?
Yeah, so that one who came in last week, it was interesting because the minute I was on a phone call, a conference call with a different client, and all of a sudden I hear whispers, and then the door opens as I get off the call, and a bunch of people are standing in the hallway saying, "What should we do?" So we do have protocol. We have really good building security, and so we shut our door, it's locked, and then building security does a very good job of identifying the person. If we're able to find pictures of them to give to security, it helps. It helps a lot to have social media because everyone's out there, so you can find pictures pretty easily. In that particular instance, we weren't anticipating that, so we kind of had to run at it really quick and figure out, okay, let's get this picture to security. How do we address that? With the one that happened quite a while ago, we knew what he looked like, and so we just have that idea that if this person shows up, we got to shut the doors.
Yeah.
Alert security.
Yeah.
The more you speak, Max, it sounds like you have a really cool head, and you have to remain calm in situations that are anything but calm. What are some other qualities or skills do you think are good for a young lawyer or maybe even a law student to have if they want to be successful in this area of law?
Yeah, so I think the cool-headedness is something that you have to work on, right? So I always thought, when you go into family law, you hear and people advertise themselves as being pit bull lawyers or bulldog lawyers, and they're going to go in there. And what happens is you get this dynamic in a divorce where you have people who are emotionally at their worst state. And I always remind litigants and other lawyers, think about the emotion that goes into getting married to somebody or having children with them. Those are the happiest times that people have, right? And so there's celebrations and everyone's happy. And so the emotion on the flip side of that coin is equally as strong, but it's negative. And so litigants oftentimes want to go after their ex because they feel wronged that this thing that they enjoyed or that they had is being torn apart. And so, I talked earlier about your job is to kind of pull them out of that and focus on being the rock in the storm for them. And I think people who take this approach of being the pit bull, you can be a pit bull and an effective advocate, but becomes white noise. So if you're yelling all the time and you're screaming all the time, it's not effective. And so I think the thing I would tell young lawyers is you're not going to be effective if you just take on this persona of your client where they're at and just start yelling and screaming and arguing.
So I was going to ask you, do you get together is there like a family law bar that you can meet up with other family law attorneys? And how is the civility in the family law area?
Yeah, so there's a number of different associations geared at just family law practitioners. And so they have events. So when it comes around the holiday season, there's probably 3 or 4 holiday parties we go to. There is a small group of lawyers that have been doing it for a while. They work at notable firms. Typically, we have a lot of cases with them. And it all comes down to we're all going to be on the wrong side of a case at some point. And there has to be some empathy for the other lawyer, knowing the situation they're in, arguing out of a tough spot for a client who may have done something that's less ideal than you would have wanted. And so I hate to use the term what goes around comes around, but I think lawyers with more experience recognize that you're not always going to have the winner on a case. And so you have to basically say, listen, we're all in this as lawyers and we have a job to do and we're going to advocate. And I'll even say to lawyers, I know you're going to send me an angry email. That's fine. I'm not going to take it personally. And so certain lawyers in that group know that. And there is a lot of collegiality in that tight group.
Yeah, we've talked in the past to others about the civility in the legal community. And we kind of say that for lay people that don't understand that, yeah, maybe we are on other sides on this issue, but there has to be civility if we want to get something done. So I think that's a really good point. And it's good for young lawyers and law students to know that. I'm thinking a lot about law students because we are kind of at the beginning of the summer and we have the clerks here, and kind of going back to your law clerk journey. Is there any advice you could give to someone, this is their first summer, and they're starting off as a clerk or a summer associate? What's some good advice that you would have for them to be successful this summer?
I think just try, if you're at a firm, if you're working somewhere that has different areas, just try them all out. Try to reach out to the lawyers in the different departments because you really don't know if you're going to like a practice area until you've been entrenched in it a little bit. So if I was fortunate to be at a law firm that does a lot of different types of trial work. And so I got to try things out. I know I kind of got walked into family law, but I've had people that we've worked with who have really enjoyed as law clerks working in the family law department because our department, because of the nature of what we're dealing with, we all really heavily rely on one another. So we have 3 paralegals, 2 lawyers. We're all really close. Before I came here, we were all sitting in a conference room together, eating lunch, joking about stuff. Really leaning on each other helps. And I think you see that a lot in good family law groups where the teams rely on themselves, knowing that, hey, if something goes bad in court or a client just got really upset with you and you kind of became the whipping post for them, you are able to just lean on your team, essentially as friends, like you're kind of battle tested together.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, yeah, for young lawyers, try it out. Family law is, if you want to be in a courtroom, you'll be in a courtroom with family law. You'll have substantive hearings regularly. So it's not just that you're walking through a process. You're going to have hearings. You're going to use the rules of evidence. You're going to make arguments to a judge. And you're going to get to work with people. For me, it's nice to work with people in these very vulnerable states. You get to work with them and help them solve what is likely the biggest problem they will have in their lives.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
The wrong business structure can cost your clients time, money, and legal headaches. The Wisconsin Business Entities Handbook is your essential guide, covering taxes, liability, management, and filings, so you can give your clients the right advice at the right time. Get your copy today at wispar.org/books to help your clients make informed decisions with confidence.
Networking can be an important part of your practice, and there's no better place to network than the Wisconsin Solo and Small Firm Conference. Find out more at wispar.org/WSSFC. Are you a paralegal in Wisconsin looking to take your career to the next level? Consider becoming a State Bar Wisconsin certified paralegal. Holding this voluntary certification shows that you are a professional of the highest caliber with Wisconsin-specific education and experience. Visit wisbar.org/paralegal to learn more about how you can become a certified paralegal and take your career to the next level. Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up podcast.
I'm interested in like the anatomy of a divorce case, because you mentioned you had one that was ongoing for like 8+ years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when a couple gets divorced, it's not necessarily over at
Correct.
that stage, right? So, take me through the typical divorce case. Let's say it's someone with minor children or a couple with minor children. Like, what are those issues that come out throughout the life of the case?
Yeah, so the issues that a court's going to address in divorce work is you're going to have legal custody and physical placement. So those are the two primary things the court wants to resolve, because you have children and they want finality for the children. So legal custody is like decision making that we as parents have for our children, things like non-emergency medical decisions and school choice. Placement is the time the kids spend with each parent, and that's a driving variable in child support, which is a formula that we have to use. And then from there, we get to move into the financial aspect of a divorce, which is things like spousal support and property division. And so with the exception of property division, which there are some outliers, which I can explain, a lot of those aspects require change as time goes on. So like I talked about earlier, when kids get older, things change. A 3-year-old is not the same as a 13-year-old. An 8-year-old is not the same as a 15-year-old. And so just from not just age, but their activities. I mean, I look at my kids and they're in soccer now. They might not be in soccer in 10 years. I've got a 3-year-old who's in no sports, but she might be in sports in a few years. They might be in other sorts of activities. And so when those things come up and those needs change, as family dynamics change, it's an ever-changing thing, right? If you get divorced, you might get remarried. If you get remarried, that person might have kids of their own. They're going to be introduced. They're going to become a step-parent. And so those things all impact the future of a new family or new family dynamic. And so the courts maintain jurisdiction to address, do things need to change because they weren't the same at the time of divorce as they are now? And then with finances, people get raises, people get new jobs, they might lose their job. And so those finances impact how we address support in the future.
I'm curious, part of my practice sometimes requires me to interpret prenuptial agreements or divorce decrees, and I see really good prenuptial agreements and some that aren't so great. So we talked a lot about kind of post-divorce, but in your experience, what can people do to kind of safeguard themselves, or not even safeguard, just create a smoother transition in the unfortunate event of a divorce?
Two things. We always talk at our office, and I've had friends even say, I wish I had known this. So I do think it's important before you get married to educate yourself on a divorce, so that you know that you're not surprised that you built your life together and now your life together is coming to an end to some degree. What happens and what are my rights? And so I think it's important for people to educate themselves before they get married. As far as prenups go, prenups depend. I don't have a prenup. The joke is I had nothing to nup, even though that's not right. But the reality is, they do. There are some that are really well written, but the thing about prenups, and I draft them at my office, and I've seen some that are written by really brilliant lawyers at big firms, and they've gotten thrown out. And the problem is you don't know how good your prenup is until you're in front of a judge.
That's right.
And the judge is making a decision whether it follows the certain legal analysis that has to be met, and they erode over time, like everything else. As you stay married longer, prenups become less effective.
Are prenups common?
They're becoming more popular, I will say that. I've gotten a lot more calls from people wanting to do prenups. And the question I always ask is, well, what are we looking to protect? Because prenups are really focused on what do you have today that you want to protect through the marriage, not trying to prospectively protect things that may come to be. And so they're becoming more popular. I've had a couple. I had one 2 years ago that went to litigation over the validity, and we had a bunch of drafting lawyers having to testify about what was done, and the prenup ultimately got thrown out.
Boy.
So,
What about postnups? Do you draft those or see those a lot?
I have an interesting story on that one too.
What is a postnup?
A postnup, so nup refers to the nuptials. So technically they're called marital property agreements.
Okay.
So you're identifying property that's going to be individual or marital. So a postnup just refers to the time in which you sign it, and so it's after the nuptials, so after you're married. They're a little more difficult because at the time you draft them, the person already has a marital interest. So if I acquire an asset right now while married, my wife automatically becomes 50% owner through the marital estate. It doesn't mean she can dictate what happens with the asset, but she has an interest in it for ownership purposes or division purposes. So a postnup is trying to re-identify that as individual property. And so the two parties really have to be on board. It can't just be, well, if we don't sign this, we don't get married. Well, you're already married. So now it's, how do we have to look to prolong the marriage by resolving this now rather than going into a divorce.
Yeah, I think you were going to tell a story.
Yeah, about
my mentor had a case where there was a postnup, and the idea behind a postnup, it sounds counterintuitive, but purpose of a postnup is to prolong the marriage, right? So you're doing it to avoid the divorce and having the court decide on it. What happened in this case was the parties signed a postnup over a business interest, and then the business owner and the divorce filed for divorce 30 days later. And so then it looked like they were trying to circumvent the divorce system. And so as we delved into what is necessary for an effective postnup, we were successful in getting it upheld. But it really came down to what was the basis for wanting the postnup. And in that particular situation, we were looking to protect ongoing debt accrual by the non-business owning party and how that impacted the business. And so the party with the business was like, well, you're accruing all this debt. I want a postnup to protect it. And then 30 days later, she found out that he had accrued a bunch more debt and caused more issues. So the postnup was still valid because it wasn't used to circumvent the court system and the state's involvement in a divorce. It was used to protect the business, and that's what it did. So
it's interesting to me that you're saying the marital agreements, whether they're prenuptial or postnuptial, are becoming more common, especially given that Wisconsin's a community property state, and it's only one of like 9 or 10 states, I think, in the country that are community property. So I'm surprised that hasn't always been like a big business where people want those.
I think business owners, I think it's pretty standard if someone has a business lawyer, they suggest get a prenup, or if they have an estate planning lawyer, they say get a prenup. But what I'm seeing more today is people not knowing what a prenup is and just asking for a prenup, wanting to protect what happens if I get a divorce. And the part of that, I think, is people are educating themselves on divorce. Divorce has become more and more prevalent over the years, and so people want to protect themselves. They just don't know what it is they're protecting, so they just need guidance on what they're able to protect.
Yeah. Let me ask you this: do you ever see cases in which a couple is not married, but they've lived together for a long period of time, and so they may have property? I mean, how does that work when they're not married?
So you can file a civil lawsuit. So I had one, of course, that went to trial, and we settled it on the first day of trial. The judge took us into chambers as lawyers and said, you got to resolve this. And those are horrible cases because if in this particular case, they had lived together for 30 years and they had acquired so much stuff, just stuff. And they had buildings on the property, like these little like storage sheds that were just full of stuff. And they were fighting over what was the value of every possible little thing. And I'll never forget in that case, the biggest fight was over these car seats where the gentleman was remodeling a car and he had paid to have these seats reupholstered and they hadn't been installed yet and they had gone missing. And so he was willing to go to trial, and there was maybe some disingenuous commentary about whether the lady knew where they were. And then, of course, when push came to shove, I just remember sitting in a conference room asking her and her daughters, where are the seats? Like, do you know? You have to tell me. Yeah, we can bring them tomorrow. And
of course.
They were produced. And then, of course, I had to lug them in my office, and they're not light. And we were like carrying them out to one of my paralegals' pickup trucks so he could like deliver them. And it was just, I have pictures of it. It was a disaster. But yeah, there are civil remedies. We don't have laws that allow for marriage outside of getting a license and getting married, but we do have laws that protect your interest in property for we'll call it a bad breakup.
Are there a lot of pro se litigants in family court?
Yes. I probably don't see that a lot because once I'm involved in a case, normally there's a lawyer on the other side already, or there will be a lawyer soon. But I hear from judges all the time the amount of pro se litigants they see. Like in Milwaukee County, I'll give you an example. Those judges have 5 days of calendar a week, and they're hearing stuff every 15 to 30 minutes for the full day. And I would probably say it's fair to say more than half of them are pro se. And so the judge has to like walk this line of directing them of what to do, but not giving advice. So there are a lot of pro se litigants. I prefer cases, and I tell this to clients, I prefer that the other side gets a really good divorce lawyer, because a really good divorce lawyer is easier to communicate with. They're easier to negotiate with. They know the law. Trying to negotiate with a divorce lawyer who doesn't know what's going to go down, or a pro se litigant who doesn't know what's going to happen, it's really difficult. It's like trying to say, I'm reading this document and I'm telling you what it says, and they just have this inherent distrust for you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We're talking a lot about divorce, but you mentioned earlier that something that's maybe a brighter spot that you get to do is adoptions.
Yes.
Are there any cases that stand out, adoption cases that you've done of late that were really heartwarming or really kind of still pull at your heartstrings today?
I'll never forget the first one I was involved in, where the judge made a comment, and this was early in my career, that this is one of the few things that she got to do that was a happy moment in court, right? And this was in juvenile court in Milwaukee. And so the kids were there for the adoption. They had lived with this step parent for almost their entire lives. So it was more of a process for them, but it was so much more than that to the family. And the judge took the kids back into chambers, and she had prizes for that, like presents for them, like sports memorabilia to like commemorate the day. That impacted me. The one I did yesterday, to see the stress of not knowing what's going to happen in a proceeding, and then when the kids are in there and the step parent is testifying about why they want to be the adoptive parent, and they adopt the child, and then they're taking pictures with the judge, and they took a picture with me to commemorate the day. Those are just positive. I mean, those, I'll never forget those moments, because it's you've helped a family in a different way, and you've kind of brought this family unit together, and everyone was happy.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Hi, Russell Nicolay here with Nicolay Law, Accident and Injury Lawyers. If you have clients that have been injured, my office would love the opportunity to help them get compensated and get their life back on track. We handle referrals and co-counsel relationships on injury cases all across Wisconsin.
Like the Wisconsin lawyers they work with, Wilmick does business with care and responds thoughtfully in real time to being a reliable malpractice insurance company and risk management resource for lawyers. Wilmick stands by their policyholders with advice, relevant risk resources, and claims management.
Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up podcast.
You mentioned the stress, though. I guess I'm not educated on how the adoptions work. Where's the tension or the stress coming in?
So in order to effectuate a step-parent adoption, you have to also terminate the parental rights of a biological parent who has abandoned or gone missing, essentially. And so I think the concern is, when things go smoothly, it's a nice day, right? It takes 20 minutes in courtroom proceedings, and everyone's happy at the end of it. Kids get ice cream afterward, right? It's like a nice summer day. When they don't go smoothly, the bio parent shows up, and then you potentially have a jury trial, and you have to prove why their parental rights should be terminated. So the stress is the unknown, because they're so far and few between that these cases happen, that there's this stress of, what if this person shows up? What if they contest it? What if we're not actually able to do this? Now the kids are here, because they have to do a simultaneous TPR with adoption. So in family court, kids are not in court. They don't show up. We keep them out of the courtroom because of how that could impact them. But in adoptions, they're there to commemorate the day.
Right.
But what happens if it doesn't go as planned, and now the kids are there and they kind of see things unfolding?
You always see like movies and stuff of like families getting divorced, and the kids are in the courtroom testifying like who they want to be with. That doesn't happen, does it?
I'm going to say it doesn't happen because it hasn't happened to me.
Yeah.
And I haven't talked to anyone it's happened to. The family law bar puts out a little journal. I think it's once a month. And there's an article talking about the potential need to call kids as witnesses. I had a case that was set for trial about a month ago where there was a threat that a stepchild was going to be called, a 16-year-old, as a witness. It's not ideal. It's not, judges do not look fondly upon it. It is not something, kids do not get brought into the courtroom and say, pick which parent you want to be with. What happens instead is, if the parents cannot agree on what we're going to do with the children's time, the court appoints a guardian ad litem to represent this abstract idea of their best interest. And so that individual will talk to the kids, depending on their age. I mean, a 3-year-old doesn't add much to the conversation, but they'll talk to the kids, and they'll provide recommendations based on that. Some counties have social workers that will also interview the kids, and then they can become fact witnesses for the court. So if there's a dispute, they can testify about what they talked to the kid about, or what they talked to maybe a teacher or a doctor or a therapist about.
Yeah.
So the goal is to, at all cost, avoid a child coming in to court, and I've not seen it once.
I'm interested. So a family goes through this terrible divorce process, and everyone is emotionally charged. But do you see the light? Do you see for families the light at the end? Like, I mean, does it just take time for the family to heal, and later on the couple that maybe were really fighting hard can resolve and come together and just be co-parents, and things are amicable?
I can't say I see it a lot. I see it enough that it's possible. And I try to tell clients at the beginning of a case, that's what you want. Mm-hmm. You want to support the other parent. I had a judge in Washington County say something to these two parents who just could not for 10 years get along. And they fight about everything. They fight about whether it's raining or not raining outside. And the judge said, listen, kids deserve to have and love and be proud of both of their parents. And you're impacting and withholding that from them by fighting the other parent. And so I try to use that when I talk to clients and say, at the end of the day, that's your child's dad, that's your child's mom. You want to do that. And I think some people respond well to that, and some people, it takes time. It takes me a lot of what I do is repetitive to clients to remind them of what we're working for here, because we're trying to protect. When you have kids in a divorce, you're trying to protect the kids. You don't want them to be impacted. It's going to be stressful for them. There's a lot of change. You don't want to bring them into the animosity of a broken down relationship between mom and dad. You want to show that you can support, because if you look at like bio parents examples, they're half of that parent, right? So if you're sitting there putting down dad or putting down mom, you're effectively putting down 50% of who that child is. And that has horribly negative impacts on the kids. And so you don't want to do that. They're going to have long-term issues because of that. And there's studies that have been shown that anxiety and depression rear their nasty head in adulthood when kids are put through situations like that.
Wow. Yeah. Go ahead.
You talked earlier about how you have to kind of balance that relationship between your own personal life and kind of you're in the trenches with someone in their life, your clients, their lives. How do you manage that balance, and what advice would you have for young lawyers who are trying to achieve it?
I cling to the positive things in my life. So I'll use my son's soccer practice. I go to every one of his soccer practices, and I sit on the sideline and I just watch. And I just cling to watching how happy he is on that field, and knowing that I'm doing something that allows him to play soccer. And I just have to separate that negativity. So I always say, find something that's positive and just cling to it and use that to get you through those tough times.
That's good advice, no matter what area of law you practice. You definitely have to kind of have that separation of your life and the work. So that's really good. This is shifting gears from your particular practice, but you've been at the same firm your entire career. What has made you stay at that firm? You continue to choose it. So what's the reason? And I'm really asking this because when law students or young lawyers, when they're thinking about changing careers or moving firms or moving companies, I constantly hear this question, like, when is it time to leave, or when do you know you should stay? So what keeps you at your firm?
I've said this, I think, in interviews before for our firm's website, but like I have a lot of pride in the history of my firm. And so I've always wanted to be a person who kind of grabbed the baton and moved our firm into like a next phase of, we're not just a 50, 60-year-old law firm, but maybe we're 80, 90, 100 years old one day. But the people that I've been surrounded by have been incredible mentors over the years, and they continue to be good mentors even as I've gained experience and kind of been on my own 2 feet now in my practice. I really enjoy the people I work with, and that really, really helps. I can rely on them. I trust them.
How long have you been at the firm?
In any capacity, a little over 13 years. As a lawyer, as 12 years.
And who are some of your mentors coming in?
Yeah, so right off the bat, there's Richard Reilly. And so Richard's been there since the get-go. He's Reilly on the door. He and I have grown close over the years, and throughout the day, we always talk about just various things. We just take moments to just talk about things outside of practice. Jason Luzak, who has been a very close friend of mine for a long time, practices in a different area, but has been a mentor on just building a practice. Josh Gimbel has been a very close friend, and he's one of those people who I don't think there's any overlap. At least with Jason, we have overlap in our practice areas between criminal defense and family law. With Josh, I don't have overlap, but Josh and I have just become close over the years, and he came from Michael Best. He was at a bigger firm where they really do a good job of senior lawyers meeting with younger lawyers and kind of just talking to them as people. And he did that with me, and that really impacted me. Those three primarily. I mean, everybody at the firm's impacted me. Like, there's other names like Ray DeLasto and Mike Guerin, who's since passed. I mean, those people are all very close to me, and they help you kind of give you this idea that even if you've been practicing for a long time, you can still keep being effective and have relationships with people you work with outside of just talking about being a lawyer. Because I do think that from time to time, I don't want to identify as only a lawyer, right? You want to identify as a person who's also a lawyer.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Networking can be an important part of your practice, and there's no better place to network than the Wisconsin Solo and Small Firm Conference. Find out more at wispar.org/WSSFC. Thank you, and now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
So have you kind of taken on the role of mentor for some of the newer attorneys at your firm?
I've certainly tried.
Yeah.
I think I've been effective at it, but you'd have to ask them. I try to set up happy hours with them and take them out to lunches, because I thought that was so helpful to me as a young lawyer. Because as a young lawyer, right, you're learning to swim essentially, and it's nice to get that breath of air from somebody who's been through that road as a young lawyer. And so I am trying now that I've kind of settled myself this far in to try and do that and provide that to younger lawyers. And so I hope that I'm doing a good job about it, but I'm trying.
Yeah.
Do you still self-identify as a young lawyer?
I was in front of a commissioner a couple of months ago, and I said, I haven't been doing this that long. And I meant it to be, I'm a young lawyer, and he's known me for a long time. He goes, you don't get to say that anymore. He thought I was being combative.
Yeah.
And so now that's my joke, is when everyone's like, oh, you're still young. I'm like, well, not according to this commissioner. So I guess I don't, because I've been around for a while, and I've been entrenched in one particular area that I don't know that people look at me as a young lawyer in divorce work. But
I think we are technically, because we're around the same age. I think we're kicked out of the young lawyers. Actually, maybe you aren't. I am. For purposes of the state bar, what they consider as young lawyers division, we are kicked out. I think we're at the age.
What's the criteria? Is it 35?
Do we need to tell our ages, Joe?
No, you don't.
I don't know.
Well, I know
something like that.
I know for the Milwaukee young lawyers, I think it's something like 8 years out, or 35.
Yeah.
Yes, like that.
I got booted from that a while ago. I was on that board, and I was the president for a while, and I'm gone.
Yeah.
I feel bad going to the happy hours, because 12 years, I don't have social media, really at all. I think I have a Facebook page.
Yeah.
But I'm probably older my personality is older than I actually am. But yeah, I don't. Yeah.
What do you think is different for new lawyers? Because we just had 2 classes, the UW and Marquette just had their graduations. They just had their swearing-ins. What do you think is new? How is law different for them coming in than it was when you two came in?
Yeah.
Well, I would say that pandemic really threw things for a loop in being a litigator. So for people coming out of law school, becoming trial or courtroom lawyers, completely changed. For years, we were just showing up on Zoom calls. We were emailing. People had a tendency to send really snarky emails because they would never have to see that person face to face. And when I started, if you sent a snarky email, you better be ready to back it up, because you're going to see that lawyer in the hallway at the courthouse. And now it's, I think there's a whole generation of lawyers who the more than half of their time as a lawyer, even close to 100%, was through this pandemic. Mm-hmm. And so it's just different that way from the human connection. And I think we're slowly filtering back to in-person stuff, but we learned also that we don't have to do a 10-minute hearing and drive 30 minutes to do that hearing.
Right.
You can just do it on a computer. And so I do think that I don't want to say there's less accountability, but there's definitely a less human touch to some of the interactions with newer lawyers, and I think that can be difficult.
I think one of the things I love doing is kind of being involved with law students in some capacity, whether it's mentorship or like a clerkship program. And they've gotten really crafty with study tips. And it's because of AI or ChatGPT. So I met a young woman, and I wish I could attribute this to her, but I don't remember exactly who it was, during interviews. And she said, yeah, one of the ways that I study, I've created a podcast based on all of my notes. So it's something you can do, some system, and you can put all your notes in there, and then you can listen back to it, like, on a run. And she's like, yeah, that's how we ask a question, like, where do you attribute your great grades to this first semester? And she's like, oh, the podcast. And we're like, the podcast? And that's what she was doing.
Wow,
so
that's wild.
The students have gotten really crafty, and I hope that makes the profession better, that makes them better lawyers, and it doesn't have the opposite effect. So far, so good. We've seen fabulous clerks at my place of employment. So, yeah, that's to me the biggest change.
Wow.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, the AI stuff, yeah, I think we're running out of time here, but the AI, I mean, we were testing out a tool where you put in an article, like from Wisconsin Lawyer, and then it does its thing for like 5 minutes, and then it spits out a podcast with two people.
Oh.
And they're talking about the article. So they take the article and they pull out all the information, and then it's like a podcast style, like, oh, this court case was decided, and it's amazing.
So they're taking my job.
Yes.
Well, I'm interested to see how it impacts legal writing.
Yeah.
Because I'm hearing from my nephews in college, I can get a framework for a paper by just putting in the issue, and I get the AI to spit out something that I can then rework into my own thing. I'm like, so you don't have to just start from a blank white page.
That's what scares me.
Yeah.
It's like gift and a curse, right? It's like,
Right.
on one hand, great that you can kind of create this framework or like an email. But on the other hand, I'm like, why can't you write an email? Or it's not good that you can't do your own legal writing because
right.
you have relied so much on something else.
Yeah.
So that's why I hope it's for the best, but I don't know.
Well, I got to say, I've learned a ton today. from
Same.
Max.
Thank you.
Max, thank you so much for coming on today. There's so many things about family law that I did not know. And it's amazing. You're in it. You got kids of your own, and it's a stressful practice. But I think that we've heard a lot of really helpful tips for young lawyers who are thinking about that as a practice area.
Absolutely. Really appreciate you, Max.
Thank you.
Thanks for being flexible. And also thanks to the Milwaukee Bar Association for allowing us to use their space today. So,
For sure.
Max, looking forward to see you again soon. Thanks
All right.
again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Max.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. If you have a topic you'd like us to explore, let us know. I'm your host, Emilio Villagale, and we'll catch you next time.